Hello and welcome to a history of Halloween. I hope you're doing well. Today is the 31st of October, so happy Halloween. Settle in as I share the history and origins of this special day. Halloween is one of my favorite times of the year and such a special day that I figured why not share my interest with you. I did a lot of research, took a lot of notes, so forgive me if I'm often looking down, but I need to make sure that my facts are straight. Grab a cozy drink or a snack and settle in, and I hope you enjoy. Halloween, this mythical and iconic festivity that has now become a central piece in our culture. But what are Halloween's origins? From the ancient Celtic festival known as Samhain to Feralia and All Saints' Day, we will also be exploring quintessential figures and rituals of Halloween, such as trick-or-treating, black cats, witches, and jack-o'-lantern. But let's start at the beginning. The Celts, who lived 2,000 years ago in what is now known as Ireland, the UK, and northern France, celebrated their new year on November 1st. Halloween's origins date back to the ancient Celtic festival known as Samhain, a day to mark the end of summer and the harvest, and the beginning of the dark and cold winter time, a time often associated with human death. Celts believe that on the night prior to the new year, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead were blurred. It was believed that the ghosts of the dead returned to Earth during that time. In addition to stirring up trouble and damaging crops, Celts thought that the presence of the otherworldly spirits made it easier for Celtic priests or druids to predict the future. So for people entirely dependent on the volatile natural world, these prophecies were an important source of comfort during the long, ominous winter. So this event consisted of building huge sacred bonfires where people gathered to burn crops and animals as sacrifices to the Celtic deities. They also wore costumes consisting of animal heads, skins, etc. And when the celebration came to an end, they lit their hearth fires, which they had extinguished previously that evening, to help protect them during the coming winter. By AD 43, the Roman Empire had conquered majority of Celtic territory. In the course of these 400 years where they ruled the Celtic lands, two festivals of Roman origin were combined with the traditional Celtic celebration. The first was Feralia, a day in late October to commemorate the passing of the dead. The second day was in honor of Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and trees, and the symbol of Pomona is the apple. And the incorporation of the celebration into the Celtic one probably explains the tradition of bobbing for apples that can be practiced today on Halloween. On the 13th of May 609, Pope Boniface IV dedicated the Pantheon in Rome to honor all Christian martyrs, and the Catholic Feast of All Martyrs' Day was established in the Western Church. Pope Gregory III later expanded the festival to include all saints as well as all martyrs, and moved the observance from May 13th to November 1st. By the 9th century, the influence of Christianity had spread into Celtic lands, where it gradually blended with and supplanted older Celtic rites. In the year 1000, the Church made November 2nd All Souls' Day, a day to honor the dead. It's widely believed today that the Church was attempting to replace the Celtic Festival of the Dead with a related Church-sanctioned holiday. All Souls' Day was celebrated similarly to Samhain, with big bonfires, parades, and dressing up in costumes as saints, angels, and devils. The All Saints' Day celebration was also called All Hallows or All Hallowmas, and the night before the traditional night of Samhain in the Celtic religion began to be called All Hallows' Eve, and eventually Halloween. So that is the origin of the name. So now, how did Halloween become so popular in America? So the celebration of Halloween was extremely limited in colonial New England because of the rigid Protestant belief systems there. So Halloween was more commonly recognized in Maryland and other southern colonies. As the beliefs and customs of different European ethnic groups and American Indians meshed, a distinctly American version of Halloween began to emerge. The first celebrations included play parties, which were public events held to celebrate the harvest. Neighbors would share stories of the dead, tell each other's fortunes, dance and sing. Colonial Halloween festivities also featured the telling of ghost stories. By the middle of the 19th century, annual autumn festivities were common, but Halloween was not yet celebrated everywhere in the country. In the second half of the 19th century, when America was flooded with new immigrants, especially the millions of Irish fleeing the Irish potato famine, helped to popularize the celebration of Halloween nationally. One of the most famous traditions of Halloween as we know it today is trick-or-treating. Borrowing from European traditions, Americans began wearing costumes and go house to house asking for food and money. Young women also believed that on Halloween they could divine the name or appearance of their future husband by doing tricks with yarn, apple parings, or mirrors. In the late 1800s, there was a will to shift and mold Halloween into a festivity about community and neighborly get-togethers, rather than ghosts, ghouls, and witchcraft. At the turn of the century, Halloween parties focused on games, seasonal foods, and festive costumes, the most common way to celebrate this day. Parents were also encouraged by newspapers and community leaders to take anything frightening or grotesque out of Halloween celebrations. Because of these changes, Halloween lost most of its superstitious and religious overtones by the beginning of the 20th century. The American tradition of trick-or-treating most likely dates back to the early All Souls' Day in England. During the festivities, poor citizens would beg for food and families would give them pastries called soul cakes in return for their promise to pray for the family's dead relatives. This actually resembles indulgences, if you know what that is. The practice was referred to as going a-souling and was eventually taken up by children who would visit the houses in their neighborhood and be given ale, food, and money. The tradition of dressing in costume for Halloween has both European and Celtic roots. Hundreds of years ago, winter was an uncertain and frightening time, as we saw earlier, and food supplies often ran low, and for the many people afraid of the dark, the short days of winter were full of constant worry. On Halloween, when it was believed that ghosts came back to the earthly world, people thought that they would encounter ghosts if they left their homes. So to avoid being recognized by these ghosts, people would wear masks when they left their homes after dark so that the ghosts would mistake them for fellow spirits. On Halloween, to keep ghosts away from their houses, people would place bowls of food outside their homes to appease the ghosts and prevent them from entering. So now, just a quick word on black cats and witches. Black cats have always been associated with mystery, witchcraft, and superstition, and crossing paths with a black cat could mean bad luck, and this idea takes its roots in the Middle Ages. And many people believed that witches, to avoid being seen, would turn themselves into black cats. So of course today this is a widely used symbol of Halloween, and we can see many black cats and witches on Halloween, especially now as these superstitious thoughts have died down, fortunately. So now let's turn to the legend of Jack-o'-lantern. So this tradition may have originated from an Irish legend around the 19th century about a man nicknamed Stingy Jack. According to this tale, Stingy Jack invited the devil to have a drink with him, but he didn't want to pay for his drink. He convinced the devil to turn himself into a coin that Jack could use to buy their drinks. Once the devil did so, Jack decided to keep the money and put it into his pocket next to a silver cross, and this prevented the devil to turn back into his original form. Jack eventually freed the devil under the condition that he would not bother Jack for a year, and that should Jack die, he would not claim his soul. The next year, Jack tricked the devil again into climbing into a tree to pick a piece of fruit. While he was up in the tree, Jack carved a sign of the cross into the tree's bark so that the devil could not come down from the tree, until he promised Jack to not bother him for another 10 years. Soon after, Jack died. As the legend goes, God would not allow such an unsavory figure into heaven. The devil, upset by the trick Jack had played on him and keeping his word not to claim his soul, would not allow Jack into hell. He sent him off into the dark night with only a burning coal to light his way. Jack put the coal into a carved out turnip and has been roaming the earth with it ever since. The Irish began to refer to this ghostly figure as Jack of the Lantern, and then simply Jack-o'-lantern. This story likely drew on a parallel etymology of the term Jack of the Lantern, as akin to Will of the Wisp, a mysterious light seen in wooded or swampy areas at night, sometimes with natural causes, other times as a result of mischievous children lighting lanterns. So that is the myth of Jack-o'-lantern. Now, we have seen many traditions and beliefs that are still being used today, but there are certain rituals that we have all forgotten about. Many of these obsolete rituals focused on the future instead of the past, and on the living instead of the dead. In particular, many had to do with helping young women identify their future husbands and reassuring them that they would someday be married, hopefully by next Halloween. So for example, in Scotland, fortune tellers recommended that an eligible young woman name a hazelnut for each of her suitors and then toss the nuts into the fireplace. The nut that burned to ashes rather than popping or exploding would represent their future husband. Another tale had it that if a young woman ate a sugary concoction made of walnuts, hazelnuts, and nutmeg before bed on Halloween night, then she would dream about her future husband. Some young women also tossed apple peels over their shoulders, hoping that the peels would fall on the floor in the shape of their future husband's initials. Others would try to learn about their futures by peering at egg yolks floating in a bowl of water. Others stood in front of mirrors in darkened rooms, holding candles and looking over their shoulders, hoping to see their husband's face. So, in conclusion, however you decide to spend this ghoulish and macabre day, I hope you have the most terrifying fun. I hope you enjoyed listening, and I will see you soon. Bye! Happy Halloween!